Hello, and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Comics. I'm Todd A.
Taylor Trask.
How's it going, Taylor?
Oh, it's a beautiful Sunday morning, and we're doing this in the morning again. Finally, we can actually do this the proper way. My schedule is not ridiculous anymore, at least for the next little while. So,
Cool.
See, I've got an actual coffee made in the morning, ready to go, and good coffee this time.
Well, tell me about it.
Well, Todd, and as if you've listened to the past few episodes, you know I've been sort of eking through leftovers. So this is like the first. I decided yesterday. I'm like, I can't. Like, I need to go back to good coffee again. So I went down to one of my favorite little roasters here in Colorado Springs. It's called Switchback. Google them. Google Switchback Coffee Roasters. It's actually there's a really cool shop there, a coffee shop that I sometimes work out of, but the roastery is right next door. And I picked up the Ethiopia blend. And it is the light coffee, and it's been a while since I've had some light beans, but they say on the package the flavor notes are honeysuckle, pink lemonade, and peach tea. I don't know where they get the pink lemonade from. I sort of taste the honeysuckle, but overall, it's a wonderfully sort of light and berry-ish kind of roast. Like, it's the kind that really works well in an AeroPress, but also equally well in an espresso machine. So this is my second cup in my fancy little mug, and I AeroPress this sucker, and it's lovely. It's lovely, Todd.
Excellent. I went back to my local roasters, Keen Coffee, or it's some people say it's Keon Coffee or Keon.
Keon.
Yeah, it's Kean. It's here in Orange County, and
Keen is probably the more appropriate.
It's got a little accent aigu over the e. I believe that's the right one. I don't know. We just call it an accent. Anyway, I got the Costa Rican roast, which is, I believe it had notes of cocoa and something like tropical fruit or like a citrus thing. I don't even remember. And it doesn't say it on the package. But this is one of those where I have not mastered getting my formula right here. I've been thinking about it this week though. Like I don't put cream in my coffee. I put milk, because cream generally tends to be too sweet. But I have, with this one specifically, I've kind of wondered, like, how do I need to approach it? Because it's, I don't know, it's like chemistry we talk about where maybe this one's a little bit too rich. It's kind of it says light to medium. I would say it's a definite medium for me. I haven't gotten the balance right yet, but you can tell the coffee is of course delicious on its own if you're a coffee drinker. But as we all know, I'm a coffee Philistine. I have to turn it like almost into a soft drink, but not quite. Like so.
Fair enough.
I think, what did I get last time? I got the rats. What was the other roast I got? I got the Kenyan roast the last time from Keon and Keen, and I think that one is more my taste. So the Costa Rican I'm enjoying, but it's not doing everything for me.
One thing I've noticed that I've been meaning to mention is that if you ever do an AeroPress and you live at a higher altitude, as I do, you really got to get that water hot. And there's only, the water will only boil so hot. So I kind of almost have to leave the kettle on the stove a little longer. And I've had to figure that out sort of the hard way, because if you don't do that and you pour it in, it for whatever reason, it just really feels flat and bitter. So you got to get that water really hot at a higher altitude and just let it sit there for a while. And then immediately, if you're doing an AeroPress, especially, immediately slow pour, slow stir, and it gets this particular grind roast has a really, really frothy kind of look to it as well when you get in that AeroPress. So I saw that and I was like, oh my God, this is finally, it's been 2 months since I've had like really good coffee that I prepared myself, which is, you forget like, wow, this is an essential human need. We need to make our own like really good coffee from time to time. So I'm going to be on this roll for a while.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. But that is only not even half time wise, but that's only half of the name of our show.
That's right.
What is the other half of our show, Taylor?
Why, Todd, it is comics. We of course talk about a comedian every week. This week it's Louis C.K. So we talk about our favorite comic books, graphic novels, and related art every week. Sometimes we even throw a movie or two in there if it makes sense, and really just dive into the details. I think a lot of people want to know, what's the next cool indie book? What's the next, Marvel series I should be reading? What's the next, really off the wall pick? And think about this as like reading Rainbow for comic books. That's kind of how we approach it. We're the three kids at the end when LeVar goes, you don't have to take my word for it. And it cuts to like, that's us. And we're drinking coffee and we talk for a lot longer than, 30 seconds about a book. That's not confusing at all, right?
Right. And we pick books that we do not tell the other which book we have read that week. And sometimes we sync up on things that we've both read, which will be the case today, I'm certain. But what I was thinking about this morning as I was kind of putting everything together to get ready for the show was, so I think we're coming up on 3 years of making podcasts.
Wow.
And we've definitely, we started out as the Todd and Taylor show, which if you subscribe to that, this is still that show. Although you can search for Coffee and Comics now. That's the title of our show.
Yeah, we fixed that. So hopefully it'll be easy for folks to find this. So if you're referring the show to a friend, just tell them to search for Coffee and Comics on iTunes, on Google Play, on Pocket Casts, where we were finally, and Stitcher, obviously too. I think it took us a little while to update that meta information, but that should make it easier.
And I think we've hit on this great format because we knew sort of from the beginning, we tried to do what a lot of other podcasts do and sort of summarize the week and what's coming up and what, like here's pop culture news and comic book news. And it was, anyway, I have really enjoyed this format of Coffee and Comics. And one thing that's great about it is I enjoy going back through the episodes because I can just pick like, oh yeah, what did we say about that book? And in a lot of times I have to do that to refresh my memory for the show we're about to record. So, but in doing so, I stumble across these conversations we've had about stuff. And that to me is the value in doing it this way. So I hope other people listening, find that to be a value and think that's cool. So towards that end, I have picked a book I know you have read.
Okay.
Because back in episode number 47, you talked about I Hate Fairyland by Skottie Young.
Yeah.
And you talked about volume 1 specifically. Mm-hmm. And this was a fun day. We had we had recorded 2 episodes in a row, and I had picked a Skottie Young book for the episode that we were recording right after that one. So as you were talking about it, I was so excited because I was going, oh, this is awesome because I'm going to talk about Skottie Young in our next episode. So I immediately, we finished recording, I went out and bought I Hate Fairyland volume 1 and 2. Actually, I think I just got 1, read it, loved it, got 2. So that's what I'm going to talk about today is volume 2, which is called Fluff My Life. And I part of picking that for today was thinking about that, how this Coffee and Comics format is working for us and thinking, oh, now we're going to have that cool experience of people who listen being able to check back on shows and see which volume of what we did. It's not always going to be volume 1s. So if you have read volume 1 of I Hate Fairyland, granted, I'm going to do this as well as I can with no spoilers for it or anything. I don't think we have to spoil it to talk about it. But you could skip about halfway through the show and listen to Taylor's pick and then come back when you've read volume 2. Or if you just want a preview of volume 2 or a review of it, here it is. So correct me if I'm wrong. You have read volume 2, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in the tank for this series. So I've been following it pretty closely and it's kind of like, I mentioned in previous episodes, there are some series where I have to read it all the way through. They're Not Like Us. I think I have to wait until it's all in one volume. This is kind of the same thing. I really don't like individual issues of I Hate Fairyland. I kind of want to read it in one big volume because it feels like a storybook. Yeah,
I can confirm that you said that in episode number 47 as well. You have been consistent in this opinion.
I feel like you're the omnibusman of comics. Yes, we have independent verification that you said on this day that you like I Hate Fairyland in one volume.
Well, like I'm saying, when I picked it, I went back and listened to that episode and I did exactly what I'm telling listeners to do. I had the first pick of that episode, so I jumped about halfway through the podcast to hear what Taylor and I talked about for I Hate Fairyland, and I landed somewhere at the end of our conversation about Paper Girls, and I just listened to it because I was like, oh, this is really interesting now in retrospect to go back and listen to how we were talking about Paper Girls and how that led into the conversation on I Hate Fairyland, and because these are very, very different series, and you made two big points. One was what you just said, which was, I Hate Fairyland. It does come out in single issues, but it is great in the trades. And although there is an arc, an ish kind of arc in the first volume, it's definitely, the other point you made was that it's easy to jump in and out of. This is not something where what I was saying with like Paper Girls, there were sometimes these cliffhangers where you're sort of left like, oh no, I need the next volume now, know? Yeah. And Fairyland's not like that. Like it is very much like you described. It is a comic book equivalent of an Adult Swim kind of cartoon.
Yes.
So I give a quick recap, which is this little girl named Gertrude is sucked through this portal in volume 1 and lands in a fairy tale land called Fairyland. It's a very cartoonish. They don't use any fairy tale properties that someone else may own. So, there's a queen named Claudia, and there are various monsters and other races of people and creatures and things like that. But it is not, this is not like Snow White doesn't show up or anything like that.
But, no, but they're based kind of loosely on archetypes that you do know from Grimm, or like there's a dragon and there's a knight in shining armor and like that kind of stuff, and witches and fairy folk running around.
Yeah, so she lands in Fairyland. And that, as you pointed out in episode number 47 of Coffee and Comics, that story takes about 4 pages.
Yeah.
And then time skips ahead and we realize Gertrude, or Gert, has been trapped in Fairyland for 30 years. So she has gone from being like a 10-year-old girl to almost a 40-year-old woman, but her appearance hasn't changed. She still looks like a little girl, but she has just been trapped in this basic hellscape of fairy tales for 40 years. And she is she's upset by this. Like she's crabby, she has a very negative attitude.
She's a chain smoker. She's just,
and everyone around her, of course, is like, it's all colorful and happy and, fairy tale and stuff. And she is just not happy with that. So volume 1 has a lot to do with her pursuing this key that she has been told that will open I can't remember what they call it, the portal or the gate or whatever, that gets her back to her world. Mm-hmm. And then, as you said, volume 1 wraps up in it. Like there's a very definitive end to that story. So it's very easy to just grab volume 1, read it, enjoy it. And when it ends, think that was funny. That was, that was a fun adventure. I don't need to go any farther, or I can, pick it up wherever you want. So here's the slight spoiler, which I don't think will spoil anything. But at the end of volume 1, Gertrude, somewhat accidentally, I believe, kills the queen of Fairyland. And according to the bylaws of Fairyland, she becomes the queen. Mm-hmm. So I definitely went into Fairyland volume 2 thinking, now I'm going to get a volume of her being the queen and, wreaking havoc over Fairyland.
Yeah.
And sort of enjoying her position. And that is, sure enough, like it starts out, there's this very, it is still in Skottie Young's style of drawing, which is very cartoony and silly and fun. But all of a sudden, the Gertrude we knew as the little girl is a grown-up queen. And she is running this, overseeing this tournament, and where this one little fuzzy creature kills this giant, scary-looking creature, and and you're momentarily like, wow, this is, things have changed. The circumstances have changed. It turns out that was a dream, and that being queen is filled with endless paperwork, and she hates it. So, on one hand, I commend it for pulling the rug out from under me, because I really did expect, like and I'm sorry for that spoiler that just told you it was a dream, but
well, it's kind of like it kind of mirrors the beginning of volume 1, where it's like she's in Fairyland, she's on a quest, so it's kind of like that sort of escapism where it's like, this is what she would be like, and you're thinking, oh, good, and but
exactly.
It was really funny and subversive at the same time.
And that's a perfect way of saying it. And I think that's what Skottie Young is doing with all of this, is that he's always pulling the rug out from under the fairy tale. Yeah. So this one definitely that was one issue is as in one single issue of the comic, which is just one chapter in this, starts with her in this fantasized version of being queen, where she, it gets knocked back to reality. And then very quickly, in a way that I don't think I need to spoil it all, is no longer the queen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, again, I sort of anticipated, now they're going to hunt her. Now something, but it doesn't really go that way. It sort of puts her back in that same spot, and the rest of volume 2, she's back on a similar, path of adventure. Larry, her little Jiminy Cricket, who is I don't know what we came down on what he is, like a fly or he's some little buzzing flying insect that chain smokes. And he is just, at this point, like, he was kind of game for a while. Like, he was definitely bored. He'd been following her around us for 30 years. He'd been assigned to be her guide to Fairyland. But he is at this point, really, he'd be happy if she would just die and release him from this contract. He's just praying for sweet death.
He's so jaded. Jaded.
Exactly. So he, but they set off again. There is another visitor from her world that ends up in Fairyland. And there's a bit about her treatment of him, and how she's going to exploit him to try to take she's found this new solution, this new sort of portal that gets her back. And then that fails. And then, so we're back on this in the same familiar territory, but it's a different quest. And then I just found, I won't spoil the end, but there's a really funny device at the end where it makes it clear that, like, Gertrude is almost stuck in her own Groundhog Day, she's sort of incapable, at least as volume 2 wraps up, of making the right choice and choices that will free her from Fairyland,
even when she knows definitively what choices will be the right ones, it's like she can't do it.
Right. She cannot help herself but be terrible.
Yeah.
So I mean, you also made a comment in episode 47 where you definitely came down on the side of get this as a physical comic book. Don't get this as digital.
Absolutely.
Because and one of the things you said along those lines was you'll just want to open it up and just look at the art. Like, you don't even have to read it, because the way that he's drawn the characters and their expressions and, like, the action of a panel is compelling. That's like what you want to look at. And I totally agree. And I am very happy to have 1 and 2. Like, I'm also very happy that I went back and listened to that episode that we had done previously, because after I read this, I felt like, wow, I really, what do I hook onto in this story? Like, do I go pick up volume 3? Do I, what happens? And I listened to that episode of us talking about it and thought, no, I'm in exactly the right place. It was just enjoyable enough. I really love the art. I love flipping through it and just looking at the creatures that he draws, and the way he draws action scenes is so fun. And the coloring is out, like, just off the wall, like,
it's
crazy.
It's like every page is like a candy store come to life.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. And the other thing I like, I may have mentioned this in the other episode, but the other thing I love about it, I'm kind of looking through my volume as I'm talking to you too, is that every character is drawn in such a way that you can almost instantly hear what their voice sounds like. And it's like, I love when that happens, where you're like, you don't even have to, like, think up a voice. It's like, it's apparent what Gertrude's voice is, what Larry's voice is, what, what Claudia's voice is. It's just, you can hear all that very clearly in your head, because he's just, it's so vibrant and so, everything is so intentional that just, you can't help but know kind of where he's headed with this.
Yeah. And that put me, all I was going to say was that put me in exactly the right place. Like, I don't have to analyze it any farther than that. We had a big portion of our conversation in that episode. And so I guess we also continued our discussion of Skottie Young in episode 48, where I talked about Little Marvel, which he'd done, where he sort of reimagines the Marvel superheroes in this sort of childlike state. He draws them as children, but it's full of in jokes really for adult Marvel fans. It's not. So we talked a lot about having that one single person that's writer and illustrator. And one of the points you made was there are a lot of panels in Fairyland where you can tell the drawing of this was the story, and sort of the dialogue or the narrative came second to how cool he could make this look. And that was especially true for me in volume 2, like having that in mind, that definitely stood out. Like, I don't want to say it's just interesting. It's not that the writing is bad. It's that the art is definitely more than the writing.
Yeah.
And there's one great issue in here, one chapter where, the whole thing it's not exactly a parody. It's just his take on a video game. So he draws the whole thing like it's a Street Fighter cartoon.
Like it's anime. Yeah.
Yeah. And as much as I love his style of art, like I thought it was really neat to jump into that style and then jump back out. And especially the jumping out, like that was actually where I was like, oh wow, that was, I was kind of like taken, like I sort of had to suspend my disbelief of suspending my disbelief. Like I'd been reading these other pages and sort of transported to, oh, now it looks like anime. And then it was back to where it used to be. And it was just an interesting return. So I would like to see him do more of that, like where he picks certain genres of children's stories or fairy tales and, warps them and takes them apart like that. But it is not, there's nothing, I don't want to give the impression to anyone who hasn't read this that it's somehow like a super clever deconstruction of, there's not, what do I want to say there? There's not like,
it reminds me a lot of
level there to it. It's really a visual deconstruction.
It reminds me a lot of how Wreck-It Ralph plays with the like Wreck-It Ralph is a great, like he goes into other games. So like he has a character will kind of take on the characteristics of like what those games have. Right. But it's not meant to be the intellectual commentary on this genre. It's just showing you the fun. And what's really interesting is that now that you've read this volume, Image did a really cool thing for New Comic Book Day where it's I Hate Fairyland, a one-shot I Hate Image. So it's Gertrude going through all of the Image comic characters. Some, like Savage Dragon or like East of West people or like, the Postal Gang. She's going through all those different books as like a little mini side story. So you get to see her interacting with all those Image characters too. So it's just kind of fun to see, in Fairyland, kind of anything is possible. It's, it's the world of imagination. It's like Fantasia and the Neverending Story, just more, more cartoony and vivid and everything too. So it's kind of fun to see how she interacts with all these different, characters and things that are all part of, Fairyland is, as long as you have the license for it, you can show anything in Fairyland.
Yeah. And I also, I also felt like there's Skottie did a really good job in volume 2 of branching out to, like you had mentioned in volume 1 that it's this, you get this sense of scale, and you were specifically talking about like literal scale of the characters. If a character is supposed to be 10 stories tall, you realize that character is 10 stories tall compared to Gertrude. And that's definitely true. And what I took away from that comment in reading this as well was that you get a sense of the scale of the world. Like she is in another whole earth. Yeah. And there are tons of it. Like I just felt I think he did this in volume 1. It just it didn't stand out as much to me because I was much more interested in this crazy story that was going on. But, when she meets the other people of the different lands, or like how the different race of creatures looks or talks or lives or whatever, there's, that itself is kind of a twist on things like Lord of the Rings or, just any typical fantasy story where every realm, has its own, way of building things, and the creatures look their certain way. So that was very cool. Yeah. So that I can't, I just like this book. I have no great intellectual summary of it. It's a lot of fun. And I'd stick with you on what you said, pick up a volume, we've described the plot to you. I don't think you need to go in order of volumes 1, 2, 3, whatever. Just, I think you can jump in anywhere.
And if you like, I would say too, if you're jonesing for another season of Rick and Morty and you can't wait, or if you just want another really good sort of subversive animated kind of really fun, crazy thing, this is definitely for you. I mentioned on that last episode, it's the best cartoon Adult Swim hasn't done yet. And I'm glad it's not a cartoon, because it really needs to live in this format. Not to say if they ever did animate it, it wouldn't be interesting, but I like that it seems really custom tailored to the graphic format, the printed graphic format. And I'll just throw one extra plug in for the hardcover book 1, which consolidates volume 1 and volume 2 trade paperbacks, along with a bunch of little DVD extras. I'm holding that right now. I actually traded in my volumes 1 and 2 my paperbacks for this, because it feels even more like a storybook. Like, it's like you put this on your shelf. It just looks great. I will point out too, if not, this is for adults. You can give it to a kid, but just be, there's some stuff in there there's a lot of violence, and there's a lot of, sweary words and things. So just be careful if you're thinking, oh, I'm gonna give this to my kid.
Yeah,
you can,
it's not for kids.
Yeah, probably not the best idea just yet.
Yeah, I mean, she slaughters a lot of people with a giant battle axe. Like, let's make it like, I mean, that's what makes it fun for adults, is that, she is, there's not an intellectual deconstruction of fairy tales. There's a just literal butchery of them.
It's like, it is bad shit in the best way possible. Like, that's,
and I agree with you. I don't think I would want to see this animated, because I think some of the crazy details of the drawings would be lost. And that,
totally.
And the details are really what makes it, like, just the expressions on, the characters' faces. That's what I really connect with. I wouldn't want to see this in a simplified Rick and Morty version. But along those lines, though, comparing it to Adult Swim stuff makes me think I would actually, because I think this sets out, in volume 1 as a quest for her to get back to her world. Mm-hmm. We're on that sort of normal Image comics kind of series of thinking that each trade is going to be sort of a season of a show kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it needs to work that way. And I don't know where it is now, but it would be great if, a trade paperback were really 5 totally crazy adventures that don't necessarily need to connect to each other. We already get the premise. She's a 40-year-old woman in a child's body in a fairy tale world, and she hates it. Yeah, she doesn't need to be on a quest to get back home. She could just go cause melee everywhere. That would be
well, especially because it's kind of clear, like, it's more and more obvious that she's never going to get back home. It's kind of like Quantum Leap, where it's just like, well, while that's a nice thought, I think she's making it impossible to do so by her own action. So it's like, what other craziness is all of Fairyland going to go up in smoke before she's done?
It almost literally does. So that's volume 2 of Fairyland. I want to hear what you've picked for this week.
Well, it's interesting. I didn't intend for this one, but I wanted to delve into, I have a free trial of the Comixology Unlimited subscription. And I wanted to delve into a couple books there. And with Infinity War coming out in a few weeks, I was thinking about, like, where, what else can get me in the mood for that movie? Where else has the Black Order appeared? And I kind of went down that rabbit hole of looking at all the things that Jonathan Hickman has written and the Marvel side of things. And the one that everybody kind of kept coming back to satisfy all those check marks was New Avengers Volume 1, Everything Dies. So, New Avengers Volume 1, Everything Dies. It is available for at Comixology Unlimited. If you have that, just download it. Grab both Volumes 1 and Volume 2. Volume 3, you got to pay for like a normal person. So I just grabbed those two. I'll talk about Volume 1 specifically, but it's written by Jonathan Hickman. Last week I did a Jonathan Hickman pick, so of course he's my boy.
Hey, he's quoted on the cover of Fairyland Volume 2.
Is he really?
Yeah. Skottie Young is a master cartoonist, and this book is a masterpiece. Jonathan Hickman.
I like thinking that all these Image heavy hitter creators like all kind of admire each other's work. That just makes me love Image even more, because they're all. I mean, it's the stable of, if Image is where you want to go if you got a strong idea and a strong team and you can crank these things out. It's really fun to see that. But it's written by Jonathan Hickman, art by Steve Epting, and the covers are usually by Steve Epting. And Volume 1. is actually 2013, so it's been a little while, but it collects issues 1 through 6. And I'll just read the log line or the short summary. I'll delve into the details. It says, to prevent the collision of our universe with another, the Illuminati must reassemble now. It's the most powerful and brilliant team in the Marvel Universe. The Illuminati consists of the Black Panther, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Black Bolt, Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards, and Namor, and then eventually Beast from the X-Men. And they unite against an infinite legion of parallel realities. Armed with the 6 Infinity Stones, the Illuminati gather to plan for the death of everything. So that's a little bit confusing. Essentially what it is it's a collection of stories about the Illuminati featuring those characters. You know, if you're familiar with Marvel, you know that the Illuminati was formed as kind of a subgroup outside of the Avengers of a rotating panel, but it's usually it's usually Iron Man and Doctor Strange and Black Bolt and Reed and various others kind of come and go, but it's those characters, and they are sort of meant to deal with the threats that the Avengers can't conceive of. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely familiar, rather, with the all the Illuminati stories, but I've there was, I think, the Planet Hulk animated feature, which came out a couple years ago, starts with the Illuminati sending the Hulk out, basically strapping him into a spaceship and saying, look, we can't have you on Earth anymore. We're going to send you to a planet where you can't hurt anybody, and hopefully you can be at peace. That sets up the Planet Hulk storyline. So the Illuminati have been around for a while, but in this particular volume, it kicks off with the Black Panther and some Wakandans finding this kind of weird temporal reality marker, like this sort of ancient artifact near Wakanda, and they realize there's a portal into a parallel version of Earth where they see another Earth in the sky right above them. And everything's red and washed out, and they're not sure what's going on. And they see this mysterious woman, kind of this woman in white, scantily clad, dressed in black, but she's white skin tone, white hair. She's got some minions beside her, and it looks like they're trying to actively destroy the planet above in the sky. And then T'Challa sees that, and he sees her detonate a device that blows up the Earth above their heads. And then they're sent back, through the portal to our reality, and everything is, the sky's blue, everything's peaceful. You come to find out that this woman is a black swan. She is a sort of a mysterious character that's kind of the harbinger of the death of something or the death of a world. Not like Galactus, he's not coming, but she's speaking in ancient Sumerian. She's talking about, she's kind of a devotee to some ancient religion. You don't quite know what it is. So the Illuminati take her, they capture her, they throw her in their dungeon. They start to talk about like what they need to do. It becomes apparent that what her whole thing is and what's going on is that at some point on a parallel Earth, and I'm trying not to make this as confusing as it is, at some point on a parallel Earth, an event happened, and they don't really specify what event, but an event happened that blew up that Earth, and that caused a shockwave that caused that entire universe to end, and it broke away from the natural timeline of how reality would otherwise end. Reed Richards kind of does this infographic where he's like, at some point, all the realities collapse into each other, all the universes collapse, and there's an end point for everything. Well, this event on this parallel Earth disrupted all that, and all the chain reactions keep creating all these other universes to blow up, and it always keeps happening on Earth. So Earth is this nexus point where all these things are happening. And essentially what occurs every, I think, maybe 3 or 4 times a month, there's this convergence event. A parallel Earth appears next to our Earth, and if they touch, it creates one more breakage in the universal. How do this sounds so convoluted? It basically creates even more havoc. So what we have to do is blow up one of the Earths so they don't touch, and that's what this Black Swan woman was doing. But she was doing it through her own weird kind of ancient religion. And then you learn more about her backstory. She was, she came from I think a parallel planet, and she was one of the only survivors. She was adopted by these other black swans, sort of dark angel characters that sort of are heralds for this coming of these end times. So the Illuminati, they are trying to figure out how to stop it. And Captain America goes, I know what we're eventually going to do. We're eventually going to start blowing up the Earths that appear above ours when they appear, and I don't want any part of that. We've got to solve this in a way that saves as many people as possible. And he's like, we can't be doing this. So they knock him out pretty early. They're like, look, Steve, we can't have that going on. So Doctor Strange does a spell where they basically make him forget everything that they talked about, because they don't want him and his sort of morals interfering. Because like, look, Steve, there's nothing we can do. We're going to have to.
Is the Marvel universe in a nutshell.
Yeah. And it's like, it's
moral conscience speaks up, and they're like, we just don't even want to listen to you.
Well, and they knock. It's funny too, because he basically describes exactly what's going to happen. He's like, look, you guys, it's going to be, you're going to panic, and then you're going to blow up a planet, and then you're going to get used to that, and then you're going to keep doing it, and you're just going to lose all regard for like the lives that you're taking. And they're like, be quiet. So they knock him out. This is, by the way, after they try to use the Infinity Stones to reassemble the Infinity Gauntlet to deal with it that way. And that goes, and this happens early on too, so it's not necessarily spoilers. That goes horribly wrong. But in doing that, it sort of wakens up the attention of Thanos. It wakens up the attention of Galactus. So like the Illuminati is just this, they just keep bumbling around. And they just keep literally making the worst decisions about how to handle this. Meanwhile, Black Bolt has got some sort of like plan within a plan that he's working on. And you get the sense that there are all these other sort of side stories, which there are, because the way that this new Avengers kind of arc is going on, it incorporates a lot of other sort of side issues and stories and things. So it really is one of those things like what DC does, where you kind of almost have to read all the other tangential stories to get the complete picture, because characters will leave and come back, and they'll reference things that you're like, well, clearly that was another series of issues that I'm not seeing. But I didn't feel that removed. I think you can still just get New Avengers Volume 1 and Volume 2 and so on, and feel like this. I mean, this story does still feel pretty compact, but you do get a sense that you're missing a lot of other stuff. This takes us to the end of Volume 1, where there's a big cliffhanger kind of ending. Volume 2 picks up right after that and keeps going. And you realize that it's interesting. Hickman incorporates a lot of things that I see pop up in his creator-owned series. There's a lot of themes and even kind of character archetypes that, I find it interesting that the Black Swan woman, the character that they find at the beginning, she's white-skinned and white-haired. And that is a character that pops up both in The Dying of the Dead, and it also pops up pretty heavily in Black Monday Murders, which I reviewed last week.
Well, so and East of West, we have sort of the opposite of that, where isn't there a literal... I mean, the cowboy is totally white clothing,
Death himself. Death himself is a gunslinger, but he's white with white. So it's like, it seems to be a thing that Jonathan Hickman likes playing with. I'm not supposing that he's doing some kind of Stephen King, like he's going to make it all connect together, Dark Tower style. He might, but at right now, I just think it's just a thing he likes to include. Which is interesting. It's just kind of fascinating to think through that. And especially when you see the backstory of the Black Swan, like she's part of a group of people that are all sort of, it's not like she's the lone albino, like sort of outcast. She is, all her people look like her. So it's interesting that he kind of incorporated that. It gets a little, it gets a little convoluted. At some point, the Black Order shows up, and there's like a whole thing with that. There's a whole lot of tension between Namor and T'Challa. You get a lot of the Wakanda versus Atlantis sort of side story, which is interesting because it keeps coming back to Reed Richards seems to be the only one truly interested in figuring out like how we stop the end of all reality, and all these other sort of things are distractions. And they say that, throughout the book, they're like, this is all just a big distraction. And then you'll come back to, the matter at hand, which is how do we stop all these like alternate Earths from showing up and trying to knock into our Earth. And you realize at some point, I get a sense like Volume 3, 4 and beyond is going to really delve into that even further, where so far the Earths that they've had to blow up have been either largely unpopulated or dead already. We haven't quite had one when they're trying to blow up an Earth of, populated by other Avengers who look just like them. That hasn't quite happened yet. So I'm sure that's on the horizon. Otherwise, it's, if you want to kind of get geared up for Infinity War, I would say this is a good pick. You get a lot of Jonathan Hickman's kind of strengths and weaknesses all in one shot. But it is infuriating to see how stupid the Illuminati can actually, like, at this group of minds. You're like, why these guys? You know, because they're sort of hapless. Like Reed Richards seems to be the only one who's actually competent. And so you just that kind of haunts the story, and you just kind of have to either deal with that or get past it. But yeah, New Avengers Volume 1, everything dies.
Yeah, and we can't even keep up with this. We are not the type of podcast that does that, but this unfortunately falls into Marvel's super confusing way of labeling things with the volume numbers. Yeah. So when you were talking about it, I was Googling it and I found it on Goodreads. They have it subtitled as New Avengers Volume 3, Number 1. Because I think the thing is that New Avengers itself has been restarted 3 times.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, but I mean, it's still called Volume 1, Everything Dies. And then they just have, like, in parentheses, like, if you're keeping track of these series, this is probably the 3rd.
You want to look for the one that has the cover that's kind of an Art Deco-y kind of cover of the silhouette of, like, the Black Panther and Iron Man, and it's got like an A in the background. It's look for that one, because as you were talking, there was another New Avengers Volume 1 that is not this story. So just look for it. Look for parentheses, everything dies.
Well, it's like for that. I'm pretty sure that every Thor book is just called Volume 1. Jesus. I've never been able to figure out what the hell they're talking about. I mean, this is and it's Marvel's fault. Like, this is a terrible numbering system.
Well, this is honestly, like, this is something to bring up, because it's one of the big reasons I am not a Big 2 fan ultimately.
Yeah.
Like, I will read Watchmen. I will read Dark Knight Returns. I will read, some of these seminal collections, because they are self-contained, they're one-shots, and you don't have to try to, like, piece together all these separate weird, numbering systems and titling systems. Yeah. And it's like, it's just, I can't do it if I'm going to follow a story. And then you never know when they're just going to randomly reset everything. And then, like, what you just read doesn't matter anyway, or it took place on Earth 10. So you got to think about how it ties into this other thing. It's just, DC does a slightly better job handling that, but, like, it's still annoying.
Oh yeah. And then they reboot it every 5 years or whatever. So it all just starts over. Like, so with this one, I'm glad you brought this into the realm of, like, a discussion specifically on the Big 2. Usually when Big 2 books do one of these, Crisis on Infinite Earth kind of things, I tune out. It's really hard. Like, and actually, I don't think I've ever read the original series, but what's compelling to me about the idea of DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths is that they literally tried to solve a problem only for their comic book storytellers. Like, we have too many Earths, but this is a thing I worry about going into Infinity War, actually, is that the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
That how does any, mortal or semi-mortal superhero have any solution to this? Was there enough of, like, a character, development of these Illuminati superheroes that you were able to find a way into it that way? Or did you just sort of tune out and watch the big picture and didn't really worry about the details of it?
Kind of like the latter, honestly, because at some point you kind of get the other little side stories kind of become a distraction, because you're thinking, if the complete destruction of all existence is what's at stake.
Yeah, those are the stakes.
I don't give a crap what Wakanda thinks about Atlantis and their pride and, like, all. I'm like, it doesn't. Gotcha. None of this matters. And then, like, T'Challa himself, instead of just telling, because at this point in the story, Shuri is queen of Wakanda, and T'Challa has kind of moved on to be sort of like, Grand Vizier for all intents and purposes. Like, he's sort of doing his own thing. There's a moment where he can clearly tell Shuri, like, hey, look, or Shuri, like, look, here's what's going on. Here's why I'm working with Namor. Instead, he doesn't, and it creates all these other problems. And he's just like, I'm not going to talk. Like, she even asks him point blank. She's like, look, T'Challa, like, brother, tell me what's going on. Clearly, there's all these other things you're dealing with. And he's like, I'm not going to tell you. And it's like, well, then you guys deserve everything that's coming to you. Like, it kind of feels, it's interesting, because I was kind of as I was reading this, I've also been watching season 2 of Lemony Snicket on Netflix.
Well, that was a wild card.
Yeah, well, I bring that up only because that show is really infuriating, because you just go like, none of the characters have agency, and you're like, if you guys would just do this, this, and this would all be fine, and it's obvious to everybody but you. Right. So I kind of feel the same way here. Was just like, you know what? I don't give a shit if Atlantis falls or if Wakanda gets bombed at Oblivion. You guys deserve that. Like, I just don't have which in any other arc or graphic novel would be like the point of the whole thing. Like, will Wakanda survive? Here you're just like, I don't care. Like the whole, I want to see what happens with, reality's ending, right? Like what is going on there? So to tie that into the movie, when that Infinity Gauntlet becomes a thing, and we will probably talk about other Infinity Gauntlet stories leading into the movie in a couple weeks. But when you talk about that glove that can literally do anything, it gets a little I don't know, assuming that they at some point will defeat Thanos either sooner or later, then what, right? Like once they do that, does Galactus even matter? Does anything? It kind of falls into that Doctor Who trap where, when we just keep escalating the stakes, at some point we can't do that anymore. Am I going to give a shit about Spider-Man, saving some local woman from a burglar? Like at that point, does that even matter? Yeah.
So where would you put this? So you see this as maybe it's a fun read in just getting back into the Marvel universe ahead of the movie Infinity War, but it doesn't sound like it's something you're attached to. Like you're not looking up Hickman's, or you said you did get volume 2.
I did do volume 2. I have to buy volume 3 because volume 3, 4, and 5 are not part of Comixology Unlimited. I might, but at this point, I kind of almost want to look at the cliff notes and just see maybe volume 6 deals with the primary story more completely. I'm not busting through the wall, waiting, ready to read the next ones all the way through. I might. I think if you're interested in sort of the infinity side of the Marvel universe, the stones, the gems, the characters, kind of where I imagine this could be something the Illuminati might pop up in later Marvel, MCU storylines and things. So it's interesting, just kind of, if you want to get acquainted with them as a group, or you want a deeper dive on T'Challa and Doctor Strange and Reed Richards especially. Reed Richards does a lot of really fun stuff in this book, so it's given me another sort of look at what the Fantastic Four could be. It's the Reed Richards that he can walk. He can basically walk through all the realities. He's kind of like Rick at this point. So it's interesting to see that. So if anything, it's actually made me more interested to see what I want to see all the Reed Richards Fantastic Four side stories that coincide with this, because what is he up to? That's the most interesting thing to me. I really don't give a shit about all the other things going on in the Marvel universe, but you get a sampling of it. So if it's something you want to jump back into, if you're like, hey, I just want a fun little story to kind of glance at the Marvel universe, see if it's something I want to delve into, this is for you. You can't. It's free on Comixology Unlimited. But yeah, it's. I will say this: of the big two, I'm consistently more a fan of DC than Marvel, just because I like the sort of the mythology of DC appeals to me a little bit more. And it seems like they're a little bit, they have a easier time solving their problems in a competent way, at least more or less, than Marvel characters do. Yeah. This kind of reinforces that mindset. I just I appreciate what Marvel's doing, but I'm like, I'd rather read it. I'd rather go back and read a Green Lantern story instead of another, volume of this.
Yeah. Well, you may be interested. I mean, judging from what I've read on Goodreads, Hickman moved to this title after doing a run on the Fantastic Four. So that may be of interest to you.
Very much so.
Reed Richards.
Yeah.
That's a funny problem to me, with the, anytime you take these sort of human characters, and then give them infinite power, like with the Infinity Stones, it just feels like you've already lost the plot. The whole idea of Marvel is the heroes with feet of clay kind of thing. And you, like you pointed out, I do think it's interesting. And, when I skimmed over the Goodreads reviews of this, where people would say, oh, there's some cool stuff in Wakanda. And there's such, great, the artist does such a great job in drawing this and whatever. But you're exactly right. Who cares about the little, well, not even but just the different, intercontinental, maybe, what Atlantis cares about Wakanda or vice versa. Who cares about that when the stakes are literally, another Earth is going, only one of these Earths can survive. You're talking about a literal like genocide where you wipe out the genus of an entire, all of them. It's like multiple genus. You're just
and the entire universe could just end, right? And it's infuriating because you get like right away you get this interplay between everybody else in the Illuminati and Captain America, and Steve Rogers is like, he's basically going, look guys, I'm not going to be part. And then you're like, this is interesting. Like I love this because you get to see, this play out. And then their solution to that is just knock Steve out, make sure he doesn't remember any of this, and we're just going to proceed, anyway. And you're like, oh God, like I would have loved to have him, split away and try to maybe stop them or find his own solution. Like, show me that. Like, don't show me all this bullshit with Namor and T'Challa that like, again, is inconsequential in the big scheme of things, especially when T'Challa could have easily stopped all of it. And he's like, nope. I'm just going to be as dickish as possible and not tell my sister anything and antagonize Namor. And it's like, oh, come on, you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I kind of I got a slow clap Hickman on, just them knocking Captain America out, because that almost it's so outrageous of a story conceit that it almost seems like he did that as a parody of what Marvel does. Yeah. Like at the beginning of Civil War, I'm pretty sure Black Panther and Doctor Strange tell Reed and Tony, like, you're fucking crazy. Like, we're not going to participate in like giving our identities to the government. Mm-hmm. T'Challa's like, I don't even live here. And just bounces. And Doctor Strange goes to another dimension. And then, so it's left to Captain America to dissent in America, to be the head of the resistance. So it's funny in this case that like the writer just chooses like, he's always going to be a problem. Let's just knock him out.
Yeah. But it's at the same token, like T'Challa could have filled that gap. And like, and it gets even muddier when you Black Bolt's up to something and you can't quite figure out why or what. There's a whole thing going on in Adelan that's really interesting. And you're like, well, this is related, but why is he doing that? And they never really delve into it, at least yet. And so you're just like, it's that thing when you have to create a trade paperback volume of all these sort of interrelated but still unconnected story bits and try to craft something out of it. It's again, I don't know. Kind of in closing, I don't know how Jonathan Hickman can do this plus all his other stuff at the same time. Like, I would have to have like one of those like crazy person, mind maps in my room just to kind of connect all these things together, just to even know what I was writing, let alone that plus another series and 8 other series. And Jesus, I don't.
Well, but maybe. I mean, that'd be interesting to do a more of a biographical look at Hickman and see, did he get kind of sick of the Marvel titles and was like, oh my God, I got to move on to some creator owned stuff because maybe I've got more interesting stories to tell. Or it's one of those things where if you're working on your own stuff, it makes it easier to work on commission, more efficiently. I mean, I have that same problem. Too. Well, and I like that you picked a Marvel title because, as regular listeners know, last week we talked about there's this giant Amazon Kindle and Comixology sale on Marvel trades and graphic novels, whatever we want to call them, collected volumes. And Taylor got 5 of them, and I went crazy and got 16. And now apparently you're experimenting with the Comixology Unlimited subscription. So
and let me say something real quick about that sale. I was doing some sleuthing around. Apparently some comic shop owners are very unhappy with that sale because it basically is Amazon saying, well, we'll discount to, 99 cents. And they can. I mean, it's no different than if a retailer just, took a $15 trade paperback and said it's $1. Here you go for like a week only. So they're moving inventory, but they're angry because it was a digital copy. I personally don't feel any remorse, only because I am such a huge supporter and fan of local comic shops. Yeah. I will buy as many, indie and cool things as possible. But at the same point, I would never have gotten those Marvel copies any other way, right? Those totally. There's no chance. So it's if anything, it helps the cause and look at the titles that they selected, right? It's not like you can get the entire run of a series. It was largely meant to be sort of introductory, I think. No, I totally agree. And I'm glad you brought that up because we make a point in every episode to talk about, would you get this title on digital or in print? And you've picked a perfect case of that.
of New Avengers, Volume 1, you probably weren't ever going to even give a second glance at in print.
Yep.
Yep. And I feel the same way about that Marvel sale. And actually, the couple of standout titles that I was watching, like the Mighty Thor, the Jane Foster run, and the Unstoppable Wasp, I still intend to pick those up in paperback. But at 99 cents, I was like, yeah, I'll just get that.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with that. That sale was just to dip your toes in. It was like when Image Comics does the number ones for 99 cents, just pick them up, see what you're interested in, and then follow that.
And you never hear, by the way, local comic shops writing letters of complaint to Image when they do that. It's at least I never have. So I think it was the fact that it was Amazon, and everybody's sort of ire is turned towards Amazon right now. And you can love them and hate them, but their use of comiXology should be embraced because it only just drives more readers into the format. And honestly, if you're a reader that cares and you find if you find a digital copy that you really like, chances are you're going to buy it on physical anyway, just to have it on your shelf, as you and I clearly do. So I think all of these things work together. I think if you're a shop owner and you just do big two stuff and that's all you're basing your inventory on, you probably need to rethink that strategy. I think the shops like a great Forbidden Planet in Portland, for God's sake, is almost 99% indie stuff.
Yeah.
And you walk in there and it's like you just get lost because it's all these things you've never heard of before that are amazing. And they have some big two stuff, but they've really gotten good at curating all these amazing titles. And I think the shops that do that are fine. We've obviously together have gone to shops that are like that too. So I think, you can be concerned about it. In the end of the day, it's a sale for a limited time, and it's pushing people into some of these titles that I think are useful.
Yeah, I totally agree. And and that idea that the indie, the comic shops are the best ones, or at least the ones you and I like the most, are the ones that really curate their inventory, and you walk in and know you're going to trust the person's behind the counter, their recommendation on something.
Definitely.
And that's the model that you and I have taken for Coffee and Comics. So what a great wrap up. That's what this is we want to help curate everything that's out there and point out some really great stuff and less than great stuff. So we'll see how that scale balances as we dip into all these Marvel titles that we've picked up recently.
Yeah.
As we go forward with all that, where can people find us, Taylor?
Well, we are online wherever podcasts are downloaded and consumed, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Pocket Cast. Just search for Coffee and Comics. Or you can, if you're listening to this, usually there's a link somewhere too, but Coffee and Comics on those services. Tell your friends if you like the show, refer it to some friends, let us know what you want to see. If there's a particular title you want us to dive into, we usually are happy to oblige. You can also find us online. Our network is called Their Network, and we are findusthere.org. And I believe we'll have a Coffee and Comics website coming too at some point. So hopefully at some point in the near future, you see that. And that will be a place where all these wonderful things will live, along with a bunch of other really great resources and things too.
Very cool. I am going to get a second or third cup of coffee, however we're counting. And until the next episode, Taylor, thanks very much. Thank you, the listeners, for joining us. We will see you next week.
Happy reading.